Welcome to Wickedly Judged, where we uncover the hidden flaws and shocking injustices in the legal system. I'm your host, Rebecca, and every week we'll dive deep into the stories of those wrongfully convicted, overlooked, or betrayed by a system designed to protect them. These aren't just tales of courtroom drama. They're real lives forever altered by corruption, bias, and human error. Together, we'll unravel the truth, challenge what we think we know, and ask the hard questions. How does this happen? Who's responsible? And what can be done for the wickedly judged? If you're ready to explore the darker side of justice, you've found your place. Let's begin. What would you do if you were convicted of a crime you didn't commit? Would you give up? Or would you fight, knowing that the odds are stacked against you? For Johnny Watkins, there was no choice. Even behind bars, with no legal team, no financial backing, and only one person advocating for him, he refused to stop fighting. And then a discovery was made. Buried evidence. Written statements and interrogations that the prosecutor hid from the defense team during the trial. Evidence that should have never been kept secret. Evidence that could have changed everything. But the justice system doesn't like to admit when it's wrong. Tonight, we take you inside Johnny's battle for freedom. How he uncovered hidden evidence, the legal barriers he's facing without an attorney, and the question that haunts every wrongful conviction case. If the truth is uncovered, why won't the courts listen? This is Wickedly Judged. I'm your host, Rebecca, and you're listening to episode 3, The Fight for Freedom. Imagine standing in a courtroom, your heart pounding. You know you're innocent. You know there's no real evidence against you. But the jury has made their decision. Guilty. And just like that, Johnny was led away in handcuffs to serve a life sentence. His mother sobbed. His family sat there in shock. His lawyer didn't really do anything to help him. But appeals take years, and Johnny was about to learn just how broken the system really is. By the end of this episode, you'll see how a combination of legal neglect, flawed procedures, and a justice system that is more focused on preserving convictions than correcting them left Johnny without a way out. Let's get into it. When someone is wrongfully convicted, the appeals process is often their best hope. It's the legal system's built-in mechanism to reviewing mistakes, reconsider evidence, and, in the best cases, overturn wrongful convictions. But that only works if the attorney actually files the right appeal. Johnny Watkins' lawyer had the opportunity to challenge the conviction itself, to argue that his trial was unfair, that evidence was hidden, that his constitutional rights to a fair trial were violated, that there were fundamental errors that led to his wrongful conviction. But instead, the lawyer only appealed Johnny's sentence. So let me break this down. When a lawyer appeals a conviction, they're essentially saying that this person should have never been found guilty in the first place. They can bring up issues like misconduct by the prosecution, evidence that was improperly excluded or even buried, false testimony that misled the jury. But when a lawyer only appeals the sentence, they're saying, hey, Yes, my client is guilty, but I think the punishment is too harsh. That's the appeal Johnny's lawyer filed. That means Johnny's innocence was never even on the table. Think about that for a minute. This man is supposed to be fighting because his client is innocent, and instead, he just says, well, I don't like the sentence you gave him, so let's just appeal that. Think about that. Imagine sitting in prison, knowing you're innocent, knowing there's evidence that could help you, that could prove you're innocent, and then realizing that your lawyer isn't even fighting for you to get out. They're just fighting to get you less time. And what did the court say? Well, of course, they denied it. They ruled that Johnny's sentence was appropriate. So now here's Johnny stuck with a wrongful conviction and no legal argument for a new trial. But it gets worse, because what Johnny's lawyer did next was something that for many is the final nail in the coffin. After losing the appeal on Johnny's sentence, his lawyer took the next legal step. But instead of fighting harder to prove his client's innocence, instead of digging deeper, instead of pushing for justice, he literally threw his hands up and walked away. He filed what's known as an Anders brief. Now, I know most people don't understand legal documents and legal jargon, and they don't spend their time reading them. So let me explain what an Anders brief actually is. An Anders brief is something a court-appointed defense lawyer files when they believe there are no valid grounds for appeal. Essentially, it's the lawyer saying, hey, I've looked at this case and I don't think there's anything worth fighting for. Think about how devastating that is for someone like Johnny. This wasn't just a technicality. This was his own attorney telling the court that Johnny had no real chance at winning an appeal. The court, seeing the Anders brief, quickly denied Johnny's appeal. No arguments, no hearings, no real review. Just a simple procedural rejection. So now, Johnny wasn't just up against the prosecutors, the judges, the legal system. He was up against his own lawyer's indifference. And when your own lawyer stops fighting for you, who do you turn to? Now, here's something that most people may not know. When you are incarcerated, the only documents that you can get are documents under your name or that have your name on them. The thing about these interrogations and the written statements of these 3 teenage boys, they weren't under Johnny's name. So he had no access to them from prison. And with nobody really helping him on the outside, it took him years to locate them. And in fact, it wasn't until me and him started talking that he actually said, hey, can you go and see if you can find these? So that's what I did. I went and found them under the victim's name, not under Johnny's name, not in his arrest report, not in his file. They were under the victim's name. So Johnny had no access ever to be able to find those. That would have changed everything in his appeals if the attorney would have just spent a little time actually looking for the evidence that he was telling him existed. This is a clear Brady violation, a violation of his constitutional rights to a fair trial, a clear case of prosecutorial misconduct. And Johnny didn't need a lawyer to see the truth. The state cheated to convict him. Because again, the prosecutor's not worried about guilt or innocence. The prosecutor is worried about his conviction rate, so he can get reelected or even get elected on a higher court. He filed a motion for a new trial, but once again, the courts refused to listen. Now at this point you might be thinking, If there's proof that the prosecution hid evidence, why wasn't Johnny freed? The answer's simple. Because the justice system values finality over fairness. In their eyes, this was an open and shut case. They'd already found the culprit. They convicted him. He's spending the rest of his life in prison. Why should we revisit this case? Even when new evidence proves innocence, the courts refuse to act. Nobody wants to admit that they made a mistake because that affects their conviction rate. So not only getting a conviction overturned, but then every case that prosecutor has been on is now reviewed because of that. And we all know judges don't like reopening cases. It makes the system look weak. Even with a Brady violation, they can deny relief by claiming, well, this wouldn't have changed the jury's decision. It's an impossible standard. How do they know what the jury would have interpreted that information as? They don't. They just don't want to look stupid in front of everybody. The judge who actually sat on the trial has since retired. So a new judge is looking over the case, and they acknowledge the buried evidence, but still rule that it wasn't enough to overturn the conviction. This sends a clear message. Even if we know the trial was unfair, we would rather uphold the verdict. And here's the sad part about all of this. After calling multiple attorneys to try and get them to file a motion for habeas corpus, to try and get the conviction overturned, they would not even speak to Johnny without a $20,000 retainer. Most people don't have that kind of money just laying around, but they say that these cases are nearly impossible. Even with all the evidence right in front of them, the courts still don't want to overturn the conviction. So if you're willing to throw away $20,000, then we're willing to take the case. So with no lawyer fighting for him, Johnny took matters into his own hands. He filed motion after motion trying to get a new trial, trying to get the conviction overturned, trying to get the courts to reopen the case. We finally got enough money together to have an attorney file the motion for habeas corpus. The one and only last legal option for someone wrongfully imprisoned. Now, habeas corpus is supposed to be a safeguard. It allows prisoners to argue that they're being held illegally. It's meant to be a final chance at justice, a way to make the system re-examine its mistakes. So what happened when we filed Johnny's motion? Denied. The prosecutor's response was based on stuff that were not even mentioned in the motion itself. The evidence that was found was never refuted. The stuff that we uncovered, they didn't even make mention of it. They just told us, well, you had access to this. It was all public record. But it wasn't. The interrogation tapes of the three boys, the written statements of the three boys, was not public record. It was not made known to anybody that they existed. Yet Johnny knew they existed. He knew that the boys had written statements. He knew that they had been interrogated. He didn't know what was on them, but he knew they existed. And again, like I said, they were under the victim's name. So with him being incarcerated, there was no way he could find them. If it wasn't for me going to the police department and asking for everything that was under the victim's name, we would have never found them. And then, when I did receive them, they're redacted. That's not even the whole interrogation. The one boy has 3 parts where they redacted it in a couple of parts. The other boy has 2 parts. Another one has 2 parts. Why were these redacted? What did they cut out that could potentially be what could free him? I'll tell you what they didn't cut out, what they didn't redact from the interrogation. They didn't redact the fact that Caleb admitted to the crime. They didn't redact the fact that Caleb asked what was going to happen to him when he goes to court. How much time am I facing for what I did? Does what I did make me a murderer? They didn't redact that, nor did they redact the part where the detective tells them, just don't tell us you did it and you're leaving here with your dad tonight. Why wasn't that redacted? That's damning evidence right there. But then again, the court system is set up so you have to prove that this evidence is essential. And then they get to decide whether or not they agree with you within the confines of the law. The problem with that is they don't want to overturn the conviction. So of course they're going to deny the habeas corpus motion. Well, now what happens after that gets denied, you have so many days to file a notice of appeal with the appellate court. The attorney that we happened to use at the time to file this habeas corpus motion didn't get in contact with us for over 5 months. So by that time, the time frame had ran out to be able to file the appeal. You get one shot at a habeas corpus. If it's denied, well, that's your last chance. So when we filed this motion and it gets denied, we didn't file the appeal because the attorney didn't talk to us for 5 months. There was nothing else we could do. No hearings, no deep review of his case, no real consideration of the evidence, just another rubber-stamped rejection. And at this point, Johnny had exhausted nearly every legal avenue available to him. Now he's trapped in a system that wasn't built to correct its mistakes. And he's still fighting. Now, of course, our next obvious choice is to go to federal court. But even that is hard to do. It's not as easy as everybody thinks. Oh, just file a motion and the federal court will heal it and they'll overturn the conviction. Well, yeah, that's not how it works either. So what can we do to change this system? Because obviously it's broken. There are people sitting behind bars who are innocent. Or people who have already served their time but still have this conviction on them. It's devastating to your life to have a conviction knowing you didn't do the crime. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people out there that deserve to have time in prison, maybe even spending the rest of their life in prison. There are criminals out there. But what about the people that are actually innocent, that are fighting a system that is meant to keep them behind bars just because somebody doesn't want to get embarrassed about a mistake that was made? Johnny's 20 years almost into his sentence. 20 years. That's 20 years without his family being able to spend time with him. What, a couple hours every other week? That's 20 years that he didn't get to be there to raise his children. And what does the system say? Oh, we don't care. We got the conviction. High five. What do we do in this situation? What do people do in this situation? It's hopeless. They are literally trapped behind bars, illegally being detained because a judge doesn't want to admit that a mistake was made. Now, how is that legal? Johnny Watkins' story is heartbreaking, but it's definitely not unique. The appeals process, meant to be a safety net, too often functions as a bureaucratic roadblock. We need to cut through the red tape. His lawyer's failure to appeal his conviction, the court's acceptance of an Anders brief, the denial of his habeas corpus motion, all of it paints a picture of a system that resists correcting its mistakes. It doesn't want to have that stain on its conviction rate. But Johnny's not giving up. He's still going to fight. Now, our next episode, we'll be venturing into a new case. Johnny's story's not over. We will be updating you, but we will be taking on a new case, just to show you how broken this system is. When witnesses testify that the person that they have is not the person who did it. When you're sitting in trial and they can't even pick out the defendant as the person who is guilty. What happened to our system? What happened to innocent until proven guilty? Not with lies, not with hidden evidence, not with prosecutors worrying about conviction rate, but actual innocence until proven guilty, with evidence that can hold up in court. What happened to that system? When did it go from the justice system to the legal system? When did it flip to prosecutors being so concerned about a conviction rate and not about whether they have the right person sitting behind bars? When did people lose their feelings of humanity? These are people's lives that these prosecutors and these judges and these courts are playing with. Some lives that are never given back. How do you pay back almost 20 years behind bars? How do you pay back not being able to raise your children? How do you pay back your parents getting older and you not seeing them before they pass away? How do they sleep at night with a clear conscience, knowing that the person that they put behind bars wasn't really the guilty person? How would you sleep at night, knowing that your significant other or your family member was sitting behind bars for a crime they didn't commit, and the system is so stacked against you that you literally cannot do anything to get them out? What do? Wait for the parole board? Well, they're as corrupt as the system is. The parole board thinks that they're judge and jury as well. So 9 times out of 10, when you go in front of the parole board, they'll give you more time. Come see us again in 10 years. Parole's denied. How is that fair? How is that fair to the person that's behind bars? How is that fair to the family that's on the outside waiting for them to come home? What gives them the right? Who gives them that power? And when do we take it back? When do we overhaul these court systems and let them know that we're not going to stand for this? There are too many innocent people sitting behind bars that should be out enjoying their life, having a career, raising their kids, living with their family. When do we stand up and say enough is enough? I'm sorry, a description of a black man is not enough when DNA evidence can prove he didn't do it. But yet you still put him behind bars? How is this legal? And why aren't more people speaking up about this? This is crazy that we're living in this day and age and all people care about is power. And they abuse it time and time again and put innocent people behind bars. And it's not little sentences they're giving them. They're getting life. They're getting the death penalty because it looks good for the prosecutor and it looks good for the judges. Well, I'm taking a stand and saying enough is enough. We need to change this. We need to get back to innocent until proven guilty and quit wickedly judging people just because it closes the case quicker. When are we going to hold the judges, the prosecutors, the public defenders accountable for doing this to these innocent people? They're refusing to overturn convictions because they don't want to make mistakes. When are they held accountable for ruining a person's life? Yeah, granted, you can get a big payout eventually once you get your conviction overturned. But in the meantime, is that big payout going to turn back time? Is it going to give you a time machine where you can go and spend those years with your family again? No. So something needs to be done to hold these people accountable when they are sending people to prison knowing that they are innocent. We have to do better. We have to speak out against the injustice. The whole reason for this podcast. Thank you for listening to Wickedly Judged. If you believe in exposing wrongful convictions and fighting for justice, subscribe, share this episode, and help keep this conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay outraged, and stay fighting for justice. If you or someone you know has experienced a wrongful conviction, or if you are an advocate, attorney, or family member fighting for justice, we'd love to hear from you. Together, we can shine a light on these stories and push for change. Send us an email to wickedlyjudged@gmail.com with details about the case, and let's connect. Help us bring the truth to light for these wickedly judged. If you would like to sponsor an episode or even sponsor a whole case, reach out to us and send us an email to wickedlyjudged@gmail.com. We would love to talk to you.